Welcome to class, everyone. Grab a seat. I'm absolutely thrilled you're here because today's explainer is, well, it's a full-blown archaeological masterclass. We are going to pull back the layers of time and dig into the incredibly deep, multi-layered historical ties between ancient India and Cambodia. You know, we often think of these two modern nations as having completely separate historical timelines, but as we're about to see, the archaeological record tells a wildly different, deeply interconnected story.
Now, if you spend any time scrolling through travel blogs, you already know about Angkor Wat. Located in modern-day Cambodia, it is literally the largest religious monument in the world. And it was originally built as a grand Hindu temple dedicated to the god Vishnu. It's an absolutely spectacular piece of shared heritage. But okay, let's dive into this. Because while Angkor Wat gets all the fame, it's really just the surface of a much deeper ocean. It's the grand finale of a story that kicked off centuries earlier.
So, to truly understand the depth of these ancient ties, I want to challenge your assumptions about the history of mathematics with a quick pop quiz. Where do you think the world's oldest recorded zero was actually discovered? And by that, I mean the physical, written symbol for shunya that totally revolutionized math. I'll give you a second to think about it. Well, if you guessed India, you'd be going with the traditional textbook answer. But the reality that archaeologists dug up, it tells an astonishingly different story.
Here's the syllabus for today's explainer. First up, uncovering the Sambor Zero. Then, we'll map out maritime trade and dynasties. Third, shared myths and faiths. And finally, we'll wrap up with the Khmer Empire synthesis.
All right, let's open our books to Chapter 1, Section 1, Uncovering the Sambor Zero and Rewriting Mathematical History.
So, for the longest time, scholars were pretty convinced that an inscription from the Chaturbhuj Temple in Gwalior, India, dating back to 875 CE, contained the absolute oldest known symbol for zero. It was a neat, tidy historical fact. But then, in 1931, the whole paradigm shifted. A French archaeologist named Georges Cotis was working in the temple ruins at Sambor in Cambodia. And while there, he deciphered a 7th century plaque that contained a dot, the symbol for zero. When the radiocarbon dating was finally confirmed, it literally stunned the historical community. The Sambor zero was dated to 683 CE. Think about that. That means the written zero found in Cambodia predates the famous Gwalior zero in India by exactly 192 years. From an archaeological standpoint, this is incredibly exciting stuff. What it proves to us is that the ancient links between India and Cambodia weren't just some one-way street where religion was exported. No, it was a highly dynamic two-way exchange encompassing high sciences, complex mathematics, art, and philosophy. And this was all happening long before the very first stone of Angkor Wat was ever carved.
Moving on to Section 2, Maritime Trade and Dynasties, the Economics of Cultural Exchange.
So how exactly did these complex ideas travel thousands of miles in the ancient world? Well, they didn't travel in a vacuum. They traveled on boats. Starting as early as the 3rd century CE, a booming maritime trade kicked off between India and Southeast Asia. It was this continuous, bustling network of merchants that laid the groundwork. By the 7th century, boom, we get the Sambor Zero. The 8th century brings some incredible political crossovers. By the 9th century, the great Khmer Empire is on the rise, and jumping to the 11th century, Indian naval powers are heavily integrated into Southeast Asian ports. The economic engine is literally what drove the cultural synthesis.
Let's zoom in on those political crossovers for a second, because they are honestly mind-blowing. Historians believe that the Kingdom of Champa in Vietnam was actually founded by ancient merchants from the city of Champa in present-day Bihar, India. And even more astounding, a branch of the South Indian Pallava dynasty ruled in Vietnam. Then in the 8th century, a Vietnamese Pallava prince was actually brought over to India to rule the Indian Pallava dominions. The crucial takeaway here is that this wasn't just casual trade. We're talking about a deeply integrated, ancient, globalized world where royal bloodlines and courts were completely interwoven.
And this relationship only intensified as time went on. By the 12th century, the mighty Chola Armada, led by Rajendra Chola, established utter dominance over Southeast Asian ports, heavily steering trade and regional politics. But it wasn't just soldiers and spices on those ships. Alongside the merchants and navies went the monks. Buddhism spread like wildfire to Cambodia and the broader region through massive Indian ports like Tamralipti in Bengal and the ports of Kalinga. Essentially, religion followed the cash flow along these established trade routes.
Which brings us right to Section 3, Shared Myths and Faiths, Decoding Spiritual Connections.
Now, beyond the ledgers of merchants and the battles of kings, we really need to look at how everyday people and the elites made sense of this shared universe.
When you break down the archaeological evidence category by category, the depth is just staggering. Take religion, for instance. If you visit the incredibly popular Elephanta Cave complex in Mumbai today, you're actually standing inside a shrine of the Pashupatas, which is a lost Shaivite sect. Well, guess what? Scattered across the Mekong River Delta in Cambodia, archaeologists have unearthed remains proving the Pashupatas thrived there too. The exact same goes for the cult of Naga worship, which flourished in both early medieval Cambodia and India. We've already touched on the shared science of the zero, but now let's dig into their foundational mythology, specifically the story of a man named Kaudinya.
Every great power needs an origin story, right? And the Khmer Empire, which ruled Cambodia from the 9th to the 14th centuries, was no different. According to their foundational myth, the empire was actually established by the descendants of an Indian Brahmin named Kaudinya. The story goes that Kaudinya traveled to the region, married a local princess, and established the kingdom. What this narrative really highlights is a profound admiration for Indian high culture. The locals used this connection to legitimize and elevate their own royal lineage.
And this brilliantly illustrates just how massive this cultural imprint was. This whole trope isn't isolated just to Cambodia. Similar stories, an Indian prince arriving, marrying a local princess or goddess, and their kids establishing great kingdoms, this is a super common foundational theme. You find it across Malaysia, Indonesia, the Philippines, and Vietnam. It was quite literally the prevailing regional framework for explaining the birth of civilization in Southeast Asia.
All right, class, this brings us to our fourth and final section, the Khmer Empire synthesis, the grand culmination.
When we look at the magnificent temples of Angkor Wat and the Bayon today, we really shouldn't just see them as standalone ancient wonders. We need to view them as the spectacular physical manifestations of everything we've covered in this explainer. The Khmer Empire didn't just passively copy Indian architecture, they synthesized centuries of shared styles, beliefs, and engineering to forge something entirely unique and breathtakingly grand. These monuments are the ultimate testament to those deep, historical Indic influences.
To wrap up our masterclass, I want to share a fantastic quote from architectural historian Dr. Swathi Chemberkar. She spent a decade researching these specific ties. She notes that early interactions with the Indian subcontinent produced a spectacular medley of styles there. I love that word, medley. It wasn't about domination, it was a medley. A true blending of the best of both worlds, stretching all the way from the mathematical concept of zero to the towering stone spires of Angkor.
As we close out today's explainer, I want to leave you pondering this. If a single tiny dot on a 7th century plaque hidden in a Cambodian temple ruin can completely rewrite the history of mathematics, what other ancient global connections remain undiscovered right beneath our feet? The past is far more connected than we ever imagined, and honestly, the archaeological record is just waiting for us to uncover the rest of the story. Thank you so much for joining me today. Keep questioning history, and I'll see you in the next explainer.